Okay, so let's start with a question from Kanu Ram that he didn't get to ask last week.
Okay.
Good morning, Guru Maharaj. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Morning.
So I've been reading from the 10th canto in the Srimad Bhagavatam, like chapters 39 and 40 about Akrura coming to pick Krishna and Balaram up to go to Mathura. And my question is like, so how did such a nice devotee like Akrura get mixed up with such a bad guy like Kamsa?
Well, yeah, I think that you have to appreciate the circumstances. Kamsa was the ruler, and devotees like Akrura were in different positions, and so on and so forth. They weren't in a position to change the status, to create a revolution. And of course, the Lila of Krishna is there to defeat Kamsa and liberate the devotees in Mathura. So he's part of the that Lila, and although he had some type of a post that, as many of the residents of Mathura did, Kubja also had a position bringing scented oils and whatnot to the king, and so on and so forth. So they were all oppressed in different ways. Devaki and Vasudeva obviously were the most suppressed, imprisoned, and so on and so forth. But everybody was feeling the burden of the oppressive rule of Kamsa, but that doesn't mean that they were all going to revolt. Because the Lila to unfold, of course, is that Krishna would liberate them all. And so, despite the position of Akrura in relation to the king, we can see that he wasn't a devotee of the king. He didn't advocate the king's rule. He may have had some practical job, if you will, employment in the king's service, but he took advantage of his position there to be the carrier of Krishna to Mathura, and there, of course, at the Akrura Ghat, which has become famous, where Krishna and Balaram paused, and bathed and so forth. That's where Krishna transforms, if you will, or expands from Vrindavan Krishna to Mathura Krishna for those Leelas in Mathura. So, and for that matter, the prayers of Akrura in those chapters are very famous, and he is singled out by Rupa Goswami as an example of how one can become perfect by vandhanam, by prayers. Of course, their particular type of prayer was some aisvarya and so forth, but such was his relationship with Krishna. And then when they got to Mathura, of course, he immediately invited Krishna to come to his home, and so, but Krishna had other things to do. Eventually, he did fulfill the request of Akrura to come to his home after, I believe, delivering the whole of the city from Kamsa's reign. So, also there's the side of Akrura from the gopis' perspective, that he was said to have been cursed by them. But this is all the play of the Lila. Akrura is a great devotee, and certainly not a follower of Kamsa by any means. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much, Guru Maharaj. They're beautiful prayers.
Yeah. Okay, another question.
Okay, next question is from Dayal Hari. He asks, what is your favorite story from the life of the 6 Goswamis? Oh, and Guru Maharaj, before you answer, our interpreter, Madam Mohan Prabhu, asked if you could speak a little slower.
Okay, he's translating into Spanish.
Yes.
Madam Mohan ki jai. And what country is Madan Mohan in?
Chile.
In Chile. Okay, good. I don't know if there's a particular Lila of the six Goswamis that I'm most inspired by, any particular one. But amongst them, I've always had a strong affinity for Sanatana Goswami, the leader and the author of the seminal text, the original Gaudiya text, Bhagavad-gita. Of course, he attributes it to being an earlier text and he's written a commentary on it, but by and large, we accept it's his book. And I've always relished the opportunity to go to his place of bhajan in Vrindavan, where he made the unleavened bread daily for Madan Mohan. That said, at the same time, Jiva Goswami's affinity for Sakhya Rasa is very compelling, given the Prabhupada's affinity for Sakhya Rasa and the fact that I follow in his footsteps in this regard internally, as I do also externally. So repeatedly in that regard, we find in the writings of Jiva Goswami very feelingful expressions of attraction, love for the Leelas of Krishna and Balaram, despite the fact that he is otherwise identified with madhurya rasa and manjari bhav, like the other Goswamis. Jiva Goswami had, in his childhood, it's mentioned in Bhakti Ratnakar, that he worshipped Krishna Balaram deities in his home. And that seems that affection for them, that affinity for them seems to have carried over into his later life. His magnum opus is the Gopal Champu, a retelling of the Prakat Lila from the Aprakat vantage point. And the fact that he named it Gopal, some say it's because he had a disciple named Gopal who was close with him, but I think the larger point is that he had affinity for Gopal Krishna. He named his other book Madhava Mahotsava, another Lila grunt of his, with deference to Rupa Goswami. He employed the name Madhava there. But as for himself, Gopal seems to have been a favorite name of his. He goes so far, there are many statements, but to underscore the point, he goes so far in Priti Sandarbha as to say that the Kantabhav of Braj, that means the bhav like Radharani, Chandravali, and other group leading gopis, for Krishna, the romantic love is mixed with Sakhya. He doesn't comment on that further, but I've written a nice article on it, an appendix to my book on that, and how to look at that, how to understand that, and give an example from the Lila narrative of Raghunath Das Goswami that supports Jiva Goswami's perspective. So from that point of view, I developed affinity for Jiva Goswami and sought his blessings. I had the opportunity to see his Nrsimha deity in Jaipur and petition to the deity that I might come to an understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam, as profound as Jiva Goswami's. Nrsimha Dev being the deity, presiding deity of the Ishtadevata of Sridhar Swami, the famous commentator that all of our Gaudiya founding acharyas follow in the footsteps of commentator on the Bhagavatam, Sridhar Swami. Apparently Jiva Goswami worshipped him as well. And so these are some thoughts about the Goswamis that come to mind. I would say, back to Sanatana Goswami, the story of Sanatana, his escape from prison, his being imprisoned, him being the best Bhagavad scholar. We think of Jiva Goswami as the greatest Bhagavad scholar, but the original Bhagavad scholar in Gaudiya Vaishnavism was Sanatana Goswami. Surrounded himself with pandits to study the Bhagavatam. As a result, was kind of absent from his duty. As a result, got imprisoned, freed from the prison. And I guess I would say that story I find very, very compelling, how he moved across the countryside, how he, with his just, I would say his uncanny, I mean, he and Rupa, they were very extraordinary people to have been taken in by the Nawab Hussain Shah, the Mughal Muslim ruler, and given, I mean, in his absence, Sanatana Goswami was in charge of the whole, his empire. So they were Brahmins. They were very capable of assessing, understanding people. So the story of how, when he escaped from prison and then took refuge, along the way, he could ascertain by the way the what do you call it, hotel keeper was dealing with him. Ati bhakti lakshan chor, it said, too much bhakti is a sign of a thief. So he thought, why this person is so, so dear. It feels so, so respectful to us. And of course, he didn't know who he was, who Sanatana was, to have warranted such success or such regard and so forth. And so he asked his the assistant who was traveling with him, did he have anything valuable with him? He said, yeah, he had taken 8 gold coins. Sanatana had the gold coins, and that's how he got out of prison. And it turns out that the innkeeper had, the day before, met with an astrologer, and the astrologer said these 2 people will be coming and they'll have gold coins. So he's being nice to him, and he was going to steal the coins and maybe kill him. Anyway, Sanatana figured this all out just by analyzing his personality and the way he interacted with them. And then he gave them all the coins and went on. And then he met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Benares. It's very, very touching. He had a fancy chutter like this one, given to me by Paramananda. And Mahaprabhu just looked at him in a certain way he could understand. Oh, Mahaprabhu's not pleased to permit him as a beggar, a mendicant, to be wearing a fancy chutter. So went and traded with somebody on the bank of the Ganga. Said, what are you joking, making fun of me or something like that? No, I want your old, beaten, torn cloth. Reminds me of Prabhupada's statement there. I think it was part of one of his poems that he wrote. Maybe from the Americas, or maybe he wrote it in a letter, yeah. I'm here, I've got such and such facility and so forth, but I long for that, for the life in Vrindavan and the torn cloth, the torn quilt of the Gaudiyas and so forth. So kind of the renunciation of Sanatana is highlighted there. And then, of course, he came to Puri, the story of him foregoing the main path when called by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which would have taken him past the priests of the Jagannath temple, thinking that if he went there, he might contact them in some way and contaminate them. And he went instead along the beach and suffered blisters on his feet from the blistering hot sand. Of course, he was oblivious to it in his praying. But I found his person to be very, very attractive. The leader, the father. It's the story of it. They used to call him Munda Baba, shaved Baba, because he always kept the shaved head of the Sikha. When he passed away, he would walk through the villages, right? He would do parikrama around Govardhan. And when he would come to any village, the children would come out, the parents would come out, people would come out, treat him like a father, like an uncle. And it's a very, very endearing picture. And it's highlighted by the fact that when he left the world, it said every man, woman, and child in Vrindavan shaved their head to show allegiance to Munda Baba, to Sanatana Swami. Jiva says repeatedly throughout, at the introduction of each of the Sandarbhas, the praise to Rup Sanatana, who were famous as devotees in Mathura. So to be a devotee in Mathura is one thing, to be famous as a devotee in Mathura is another. And Sanatana Goswami in Gaur Lila, of course, is the leader of them all. Rupa Goswami refers to him repeatedly as a guru figure in his life. So those are some thoughts I have on his book. Bhagavad-gita, I should say, is probably my favorite book, no doubt, favorite book of the Goswamis. Of course, he gives a very special position to Sakya Rasa, the protagonist of the first canto being Nard, who's in Sakya Rasa in his expansion of Madhu Mangal from Vrindavan, and Gopakumar in the second canto, the Goloka Mahatmya section, who shows the way and points out the virtues and the glory of Gopi Bhav. Both of them do. So, which is much obviously what the book is about. So that's a very, very compelling text also. So yeah, those two, Jiva and Rupa Goswami, have entered into my heart and soul as some thoughts about them. Thank you for the question. What else?
Yeah. So I actually had a follow-up. It's really interesting to me that Jiva Goswami has that affinity for Sakyaras. And it made me think, like, is there a similar kind of group within the Manjaris as there is like the Priyanarma Sakhas, that they have this kind of heightened mixture of like Sakhya and madhurya, but in having like the Gopi Bhav being their Sthai Bhav, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like.
Well, what you're saying, I think, is that given that there are sakhas whose Sakhya is imbued with madhurya, like yogurt is with honey in it, the honey being the madhurya, it's still yogurt, but it's sweetened. Are there manjaris whose madhurya bhav is sweetened by a drop of madhurya, of sakhya? And I think the answer to that in one sense is no, that there's no, because this is a kind of a permanent affair of the Narmasakas, the cowherd boys who have that influence. They're even in the one instance in Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where he gives an example of Sakhya mixed with hasya. There he's talking about a mixing that is temporary. He's talking about mixing of rasas, how compatible rasas can mix with one another. And the main rasa by which one is defined, Sthai Bhav, mixes with another compatible rasa, and that compatible rasa acts like a Sthai Bhav. But it comes and goes and recedes, and it enters in. That's what Sanchari or Brahmachari means, right? So even when he gives an example of hasya, hasya is the secondary rasa, comedy, humor, mixing with sakhya. The example he gives is Krishna talking to a gopi in Subal's presence, and Subal is laughing. He tells the gopi, what are you doing here in the middle of the night? What kind of boy do you think I am? And so forth. So he says, this is an example of hasya, of sakhya mixed with hasya. But then Rupa Goswami gives that comment. But Jiva Goswami in his commentary says, but of course, madhurya is also there in the person of Subal. So there's never an instance in which these narmasakhas are spoken about, in which that influence of madhurya is not part of their bhava, like a sanchari, which would come and go. It does function like a sanchari in a sense, but it's a permanent affair. Therefore, they're not like priya sakhas who have just friendship for Krishna. That sometimes their love is augmented by madhurya, but they have a special kind of bhava vishesh that makes them a different category. So there aren't manjaris like that, in one sense. But given the compatibility between madhurya ras and sakhya ras, you can find that instances in which that influence may come, right? And then given, now if you go to Jiva Goswami's statement, which I cited earlier from Priti Sandarbha, he's talking about the mixing of rasas there. And the way he doesn't use the term sankul bhav, which is a term given by Rupa Goswami, which talks about sankul bhav means a devotee has more than one rasa that makes up his or her permanent identity. So sakhya mixed with vatsalya, for example. Let's take Balaram. He's a sakhya. He's defined by his sakhya rasa because that's prominent, but it's mixed together with, or bundled together, I should say, in one sense, with vatsalya and dasya. That's his permanent bhav. And Rupa Goswami does not give examples of sankul bhav in which sakhya is mixed with madhurya, or any rasa is mixed with madhurya, but Jiva Goswami does. He doesn't use the name sankul bhav, but the examples he gives are all examples that Rupa Goswami gives when using the term sankul bhav, like Arjuna, like I should say, like Yudhisthira, for example, Uddhava, Balaram, and so forth. But Jiva Goswami, and he doesn't, sankul means like to bundle together. Mishra means to mix. Jiva Goswami uses the term Mishra, mix. He says the mix. Okay, it's a technical point, but at any rate, he does give the example of madhurya, which is your question, mixed with sakhya, as a bhav, a form of sankul bhav. He doesn't use the term sankul, but that's what he's talking about. And unlike Rupa Goswami, he gives the example of madhurya mixed with sakhya. He gives the example of madhurya mixed with dasya in terms of the queens of Dwarka. But the kanta bhav of Radha, kanta means sambhog, sambhogamai, where the gopi has a direct romantic relationship with Krishna, rather than tadbhav, which means the gopi has more prominently a relationship with a leading lady who has a relationship with Krishna that she seeks to serve. Now, some types of that tadbhav will also have a rendezvous with Krishna's request, but the extreme form of that is the manjaris, who will resist Krishna, even if he tries to have a relationship with them. And then he tests them and he sees their affinity, for example, for Radha, and he likes this very much, right? Because he loves Radha. So when Jiva Goswami says that the Kanta Bhav, he's talking about Radharani. I mean, she's the best example of Kanta Bhav. Her Kanta Bhav is mixed with Sakhya. That's a very, like, nobody comments on that, and he doesn't himself either. That's really caught my attention. So I wrote a whole article about it explain how that might play out, and what could be an example, as I mentioned earlier. But given now back to your question regarding the manjaris, their service is very similar, because the Narmasakas are also trying to bring Radha and Krishna together as the manjaris are, and so forth. And they're all intimately, connected as friends in a broader sense. But given that if we take Jiva Goswami's perspective, that the Kanta Bhav of Braj is mixed with Sakhya, then the Manjari Bhav is fully focused, for example, on Radha's Bhav. And if they experience everything that Radha experiences, then they're experiencing the Sakhya Bhav mixed with madhurya. Now, you're not going to hear this anywhere else, but I've given it's well supported, as I mentioned. Thank you for that follow-up question.
Thank you very much. That makes perfect sense. Okay, the next question is from Sri Krishna from Madhurya.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. You can hear me?
I can hear you. I can see you.
Okay, so I have a question from the Bhagavad-gita, the 930 verse. Shall I read the translation to you?
Sure.
So it says, even if a person of very bad behavior worships me with undivided devotion, he is to be thought of as saintly, for he has the proper resolution. So I have a couple of questions about it. One first is the term ananya-bhakti or ananya-bhakti, which is translated as this undivided devotion to Krishna. So I guess it seems to be broadly defined, and according to, I'm a bit uncertain of what that means exactly, and what would the parameters of that sort of classification be. That would be the first question. And the second is that one of the concerns that comes up about this verse is that it can be used as a license for sinful activity. So, because I'm a devotee, I can do whatever I please. So I find myself sort of stuck, that there's a very positive message in this verse that sort of bhakti overrides everything, and love conquers all, that sort of message. But I find generally when there's a situation that would be applicable to this verse, I lean towards feeling, well, it feels like an excuse. It's the sentiment of this verse is being used as an excuse for not dealing with things properly. So I'm wanting to lean towards the positive side, but I find myself quite stuck. So if you could help me with that, I'd be grateful.
Ananya-bhakti is another way of saying uttam bhakti, shuddha bhakti. Ananya means unalloyed, exclusive, no other, and so on. So it's a high term or bar. It's ananya-bhakti rather than some mixed form of bhakti, mixed with karma, mixed with yoga, mixed with gyan. What speak of gyan mixed with bhakti, or karma mixed with bhakti, which would be even lesser. There are many ways in which bhakti manifests, but pure, unalloyed bhakti only, and it's Krishna speaking. And so, if we emphasize that point, then it goes to the Vrindavan type of bhakti, Gaudiya type of bhakti that's emphasized in our sampradaya. So the term is a high term. Now, that said, ananya-bhakti being another term for uttam bhakti, which Rupa Goswami uses in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Okay, there we find that Uttam Bhakti has three stages: sadhana, bhava, and prem. So in the most generous sense of the term, you can have sadhakas who are Uttam Bhaktas because they have embraced the school of Uttam Bhakti, but they may not be yet, they're a work in progress at the same time. The goal of that sadhana bhakti is bhava bhakti. If they've attained bhava bhakti, then they're Uttam Bhaktas, not only in terms of being on the generous path of Uttam Bhakti, which extends itself, to use the term of Bhakti Vinod or Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami himself, who has faith in the teachings of Uttam Bhakti. But Bhava Bhakti has experience also. Not only is he or she following the angas of Bhakti kind of imitatively, without feeling, without emotion, but actually has now attained the emotive component, the active and the emotive component of Bhakti. So that would be an Uttam Bhakta or ananya-bhakti in a more full sense, you could say, than one who's an Uttama Bhakta or ananya-bhakti in the stage of sadhana, right? And then there's the prem bhakta himself. So which one is he talking about there, right? If we're using the term ananya-bhakti. Well, it's obvious that if we use the term ananya-bhakti here to refer to a sadhaka, you could make that argument. Well, they might do some things that are out of character, right? They're a work in progress. So one could make the argument that still they're dear to Krishna because of their ideal. Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj used to say, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, a person is not defined by their past, neither by their present, which is thought to be generous. Let's judge him by his present, not by his past, but by his future, by his ideal. So even the sadhana bhakta of ananya bhakti has the ideal of Braj Bhakti. That's hard enough to come to. We'll speak of attaining it. It's very special. I've said before, and I've written about it as well, that the nature of Rag Bhakti is that it has the power more than any other type of bhakti to get Krishna's attention, because it's about those who have Krishna's full attention, right? It's about Subal. It's about Rupa Manjari. And so their love, we call them ragatmikas, following in their footsteps. That's what rag anuga means, to follow in their footsteps. So I want to love Krishna like they do. Well, no one loves Krishna more than they do. All of Vaikuntha, Ayodhya, and everywhere else where bhakti is manifest in perfection doesn't get Krishna's attention like the love of the Brajbasis for him does. Krishna says to the gopis at Kurukshetra that, it's my bhakti bhutanam amritatavaya kalpate. People approach me for eternal life. People approach me for things. They approach me for eternal life to get away from things, temporary things. They approach me dutifully in service because they see me as God. But what you're approaching me is a whole different affair, by which I'm completely purchased, right? So this is, again, Rag Bhakti. So if someone has this ideal in mind, well, that's the speciality of Rag Bhakti. Even you don't have much for qualification, but that's your ideal. You get Krishna's attention more than, arguably, someone in Vaikuntha. Of course, in Vaikuntha, they get full attention of his expansion as Narayan, but he himself is not that attracted. Is he more attracted to the perfect devotees in Vaikuntha, Krishna in Vrindavan, or someone who's imperfect but has the ideal of Vrindavan? So the argument is, well, that latter person gets his attention more. So given this, the generous nature of Krishna that would have underscored, right? When he said, Ho Bhakiyam Stanakalakutam, what is the position of Krishna? Who can imagine? Putana came just dressed like a devotee, with a nefarious intention, evil intention. He dismissed the evil intention in one sense and gave her a form of Vatsalya Bhav. So who Uddhava says, and he's very learned, obviously, who in their right mind would take shelter of anyone other than Krishna? I'm going to just slow down now because I'm remembering Madam Mohan asked me to do so. Forgive me for not doing so earlier. The generosity of Krishna, right? And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself, and there that magnanimous nature, the generous nature of Krishna is emphasized. That's focused on there. His compassionate nature is said to be personified as Radha, and Krishna pursuing Radha's nature. That's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Gaudiya Vaishnavism is very, very, very generous. We should be, therefore, very generous with one another. It doesn't mean we can't be strict and tell people what they need to hear. That if we're a friend, we're going to do that and hold our ground and so forth. But hopefully they will, rise to the occasion and improve themselves when we have that kind of insight to offer others, who all of us should be looking for. How can I improve myself? Anybody? We're so resistant to good instructions and advice and so forth. We should be open to it. We need all the help we can get. So I'm thinking about this, now in a broad way, given your question, and how it could, from Krishna's point of view, pertain to a sadhaka, which then kind of does away with the problem that you're having, right? In one sense, because, well, you're a sadhaka, you've got some faults. It's good to know that Krishna likes you anyway. And where does Krishna put more emphasis on? Your faults and your weaknesses, or on your upside, if you will? Well, it's the latter. That's where that's his nature. So he's going to go there. It's not an excuse to deviate and so forth. That's an embarrassing reality that, understood and emphasized, should give us impetus to improve. Oh my God, I did this and Krishna still cares for me. How much I should care for him, and how wonderful he is, how merciful, how gracious, how kind. Like Uddhava said, who in their right mind would take shelter of anyone else? So knowing this about him is very compelling for a sadhaka to overcome his or her weaknesses and shortcomings, which is, very much part of what sadhana bhakti or bhakti in practice is about. And so if we look at the verse in that way, then, well, it's not hard to understand. Now, if we go further, as we should, and give a more conservative definition or explanation of Uttam Bhakti, and say, well, Uttam Bhakti means someone who is not only on the path, who has embraced the path, but who has successfully tread the path of sadhana bhakti and attained the bhava. Now, if we see some deviation or some unbecoming action on the part of a bhava bhakta, that's where it starts to become, what's going on here? Is a bhava bhakta, she's a bhava, attained bhava, and we see. But Rupa Goswami does say in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in his chapter on bhava bhakti, that sometimes it's seen that some unbecoming activity may surface in a bhava bhakti, but that should be overlooked given the fact that the devotee has attained bhava. Now, this is where it starts to become, is that your question starts to surface a little bit more. But you have to put the two things together. Some unbecoming activity and the fact that they have attained bhava. Now, there are symptoms which are indicative of the fact that one has attained bhava, or there are symptoms that are described by Prabhupada as preliminary symptoms to bhava. Ashabandhu, Samutkanta, all these things. There's 9 of them. Doesn't waste any time. Has hope beyond hope, an affinity for the name and pastime, hearing, and so forth. 9 symptoms. So if we see these symptoms in someone, we'll see the symptoms which cannot be hidden, even while the bhava can be hidden, and it's recommended that it should be hidden, kept within, shared, not with anybody and everybody who might not understand it properly. The checking of ecstatic symptoms in public Bhakti Siddhanta was very famous for that, for example, because there's that can be imitated, but the other 9 symptoms which are visible, they can't be imitated. Not maybe for a little while, but not consistently. So, as far as imitating symptoms, let's say you grow up in the West, and there are certain narratives that are common to your childhood, your upbringing, and so on and so forth. And then you see a movie in which that's really tied to your culture and so forth. You may bring tears to your eyes, you may weep, and so forth. Someone in India who's brought up reading Mahabharata from childhood will weep hearing about Mahabharata. Doesn't mean they have bhava. Not everybody that weeps hearing Krishna's pastimes necessarily has bhava. So there are other symptoms, as I say. Now, Rupa Goswami says, if he has bhava and some blemish comes, well, that blemish should not be given much consideration. So let's see if he has or she has bhava first, right? But then the question is, why would that occur? Well, it may occur because we have a past, some skaras, or habits formed in youth are difficult to overcome, right? So habits formed over lifetimes, difficult to overcome, and natures and so on and so forth. Someone comes from a malecha background, for example, and then attains bhava. There may be some residue from that side that's still going on, that an attitude, a disposition, or maybe acting some way that would seem out of character. Krishna does use the word sudarachar, very misbehaved, to emphasize his point. Something may be there from the parabdha that hasn't quite expired yet, but it just, it's not something that's continuous and ongoing and so forth. But Rupa Goswami does give that. Now, so again, you have to balance it. If she has bhav and she does this, then we'll give an emphasis to the bhav. And then, of course, prem bhakti. That's another thing. The bhav has been perfected. So I don't think the commentaries on the text, are different by different acharyas, but I think Jiva Goswami makes a strong emphasis that this is an incidental thing, not a habit of a person who we may have thought was very advanced, and now we're surprised to see that they're conducting themselves in ways that would indicate otherwise. So that's my thoughts on it. Does that help?
Yes, very much. Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot to think about there.
Okay, good. Thank you for the question.
All right. The next question is from Udhava from Spain.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Been reading recently the Krishna book with my wife, and I noticed in the two pastimes about the forest fire, suddenly the cowherds become very aisvarya, become begging Krishna, oh please, you are the supreme, save us, only you can, save us from this. And like I wanted to ask you what the significance of that is. Something temporary, is just for the Lila, because that's not like their natural mood.
Yeah, in the commentaries, they're concerned about Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want anything to happen to Krishna. They're not really afraid. Your question is, why are they afraid for themselves? There's two ways to look at it. This is the first way. They're actually afraid for Krishna. And sometimes in the language of the Bhagavatam, there may be a epithet or a name that contains some aisvarya. But the mood, from one perspective, is that, protect us from this fire, because it may result in us not having your association, because something may happen to you. You understand? This is the feeling. Or another way of looking at that is, it's a Lila, it's a drama. So when there's a drama, there's some place for them to have some fear, even though they're fearless. In the drama, there's a place for them to be hungry, even when there's no hunger for such devotees. We find that in the Lila of the Brahman, the wives of the Brahmins mature, the cowherd boys become hungry. It's a similar thing. Are they hungry for themselves? Well, let's comment on when they realize Krishna must be hungry. We're hungry. Therefore, Krishna must be hungry. Therefore, we should emphasize, do something about this, right? Because they know that they're hungry. If they're hungry, Krishna must be hungry. That's such as their identification with him. Sakhya's identification with Krishna is equality. So whatever he's feeling, they're feeling. So they're thinking, there's a fire. If he's afraid, we're afraid, and we're afraid we may lose his association. So this is the way to think about that. Does that help?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I'm satisfied.
Okay, good.
Ready for the next one?
Yeah, ready.
The next one is from Kishore.
I've written about both of these Leelas in my book too, with many comments about that. So you'll get some further insight from that when it comes out. From question from Kishore. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So I was thinking about the name that a deity takes, and it seems interesting because in one sense the deity is Krishna, and so Krishna obviously has many names, but yet the deity has kind of a single name that we refer to them and that stands out. So I'm wondering, what's the significance of a deity taking a name, a particular name?
Well, the significance of the deity is that the devotee whose heart the deity is an expression of is named by that devotee in the light of how the devotee thinks about him, sees him, and so forth. Krishna gives bhakti, but a particular type of bhakti that's given by the devotee, right? So the deity is, Prabhupada, for example, installed many deities around the world, and he thought about them in different ways in different places, and he named them accordingly. And so they adopted those names. The names coming from the feeling in the heart of the devotee about how he sees them, maybe a lot of times Prabhupada did it in kind of in a broader sense, in terms of what he was doing in the world, his mission, and the fact that Krishna was participating in it, and so forth. And sometimes more in terms of an internal bhava sense. But he tended to personally gravitate towards the latter. For example, his Baba's in Braj, but he named the deities in Los Angeles, Rukmini and Dwarkadish. So that seems to be like, why would he name his deities Rukmini and Dwarkadish when he is a devotee of Krishna and Vrindavan, a devotee of Radha and Krishna and Balaram? Well, there he was looking at it from an external point of view and thinking, okay, now this is a Lila of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that's manifesting in the world outside of India, and the headquarters of it is Los Angeles. So it's a big city. So it's more like Dwarka than like a headquarters, right? And Krishna should be treated in a princely way here. So you named the Rukmini and Dwarkadish, world headquarters. So that's very peculiar. I mean, it's very interesting. But it was in relation to the Lila that he was in the midst of, in this world, right? In his perfected sadhaka deha. He named the deities in Kurukshetra. I think they have a temple in Kurukshetra or Delhi, it's closer to Kurukshetra than any other major city. Radha Parthasarathi. Parthasarathi means the chariot driver of Krishna in the battle of Kurukshetra. So that's, I mean, for him, this is all a Lila. This is new Lila. And it's a new Rukmini and Dwarkadish, and they're in Los Angeles and so forth. So, but otherwise, there are other deities that he named more from an internal, point of view. Kishore, Kishori, where Kishore is first and Kishori is second. It's kind of a Narma-Sakabhav, perspective, right? When Kishori, who were his deities in Chicago, were first brought out, it was in Pandal in Bombay, Pandal program, outdoor program, thousands of people coming. And the second night of the Pandal, I believe, or the second Pandal, Kishori were there presiding before they were sent to America to be installed. There was a kirtan, Prabhupada did kirtan and danced around them in a circle, pretty uncommon for Prabhupada to do that. The devotees followed him. He named them Kishori. In Narma-Sakabhav, then, when there are repeatedly meetings between Krishna and the gopis, and Krishna and his friends, and Radha and her friends, I should say, then the Narma-Sakas will take the position of Krishna over Radha. So it's peculiar name the deity. It's usually Radha Krishna, Radha Govinda, Radha Muralidhar, and so forth. Now it's Kishore is first and Radha second. Of course, Prabhupada was impressed about that once. He said, well, save the best for the last, which is also a Narma-Saka perspective, right? Radha being the last name there. Save the best for the last. So we go both ways, but it would have been very interesting to have had the opportunity to press Prabhupada on that name, but it's obviously nothing to do with Chicago as a city in the Midwest, if you will. So there's an instance where he gave a name from more of an internal bhav and feeling internally rather than something relative to externally what he was doing, which was what he did at times, as I mentioned. So anyway, the name of the deity is a name that the deity accepts. The deity is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. He comes according to the heart of the devotee, shows himself. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you. So would you say that the deity, like the name of the deity, is part of the window or the prakash that's being offered?
Yeah. There you have Dowji Paul. It's a little emphasis on the older brother there.
Sorry.
Krishna Balaram, Dowji Paul, Balaram Krishna. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a few more minutes. Is there any other question?
Yeah, there's a question from, actually a two-pronged question from Ekendra, but I first wanted to read something that Ananda Govinda wrote in the chat. Nice comment. He said, "Happy Father's Day, dear Maharaj. Thank you for keeping us enlightened and engaged in this transcendental nursery."
Okay.
And so then Ekendra's question, it's so basically two questions. The first question is, what should we be the most optimistic about? And then the second question is, what should we be the most pessimistic about?
Well, I'll give a brief answer. We should be the most optimistic about our prospect. Vishnu Jan Maharaj, a god brother of mine, used to say, the distance we have traveled up to the point of meeting our guru is far longer than the distance we have to go from the point of meeting him to attaining our destination. So to have a human life, how rare, how far have you come? And to have Sadguru on top of that, and Sadhu Sangha, Dulabhamana Vajanama Satsange, Tara e Bhava Sindure. So, Dulabhamana, but very rare, Dulabha, to get a Manava Janma, birth as a human, and rare still to have Sadhu Sangha. But these things together, that's the boat to travel across the Bhava Sindhu, the ocean of material emotion, material existence, which is something we have to be, what we should be pessimistic about. We should be optimistic about our future. We're pessimistic about the prospect of working things out in this world, everything, perfecting ourselves, in our lives, short of the fact, that can obscure the fact that it's temporary anyway. There's always going to be a problem. It's after before you press down here, it comes up over there. You press down over there, it comes up over here. Such is the nature of the world. So I think we should have a healthy pessimism about the nature of the material world, and it should serve as impetus, negative impetus, to pursue the optimistic prospect that has come before us, the benediction, the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's a short answer.
Thank you very much. There is one last question from Ram Mohan. Madhuvan's on fire today, so third question from that quarter.
Oh, thank you. Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. My question is related to a verse from the second chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, where Krishna says the soul is neither slays nor is slain. And it raised the question for me of where does the jiva's will reside?
Well, jiva has will, and if it didn't have will, then nothing would make any sense, right? There would be no reason to tell him, don't do this and do that. And the scriptures, on a certain level, are full of such do's and don'ts, instructions, and so forth. So it's appealing to our will, right, to accept what is really in our interest and to reject that which is not. So one of the qualities of the jiva is kartrutva, which means he's an agent of action. So it means his will has an influence on what happens in the world. So where does it reside? Well, the will resides, it's inherent in the jiva. It may be covered over by the material nature and habits that are formed that the mind and the senses that now automatically gravitate towards, right? Automatically gravitate to it. We've acted in such a way there's a reaction, reinforces previous actions. So if you look at material life, you can see the more one is covered, the less that will is manifest. It's there, but it may not be manifest. And the more what's going on is just the movement of the modes of nature, which include the intellect, the mind, the senses, body, and so forth. So if we look at less complex forms of life, for example, where we say there's also an Atma, how much is the will there? We tend to think that they're not responsible for what they do. Whatever is happening to them is a reaction from something that will expire, and then they'll get a higher birth. In human life, however, there's kind of a coming out from underneath material nature. So the covering is of material nature is minimized to the extent that the will comes to the surface. Now, the more we act like an animal, the more it's going to be covered, right? That's something you can see from artificial intelligence now is a prominent thing. And you can see that all of the activities of the mind, intelligence, and the senses practically can be done by artificial intelligence. So the mind, the intelligence, the body, these are all artificial. These are all movements of material nature. That's not you. There's one thing left. Robots can do everything except feel, right? And have a will to change, and so forth. And that's there in humans. Now, they can get tremendous amount of negative impetus. Sometimes that's required. That will to change through good association will surface. How does it, now from a scientific point of view, they have a hard time figuring out if there's will, where the hell is it? Because we think this moves because of that, that happens because of that. We figured out this happens because of this, and so on and so forth. People thought it was because of other reasons, superstitions, but we find actually this is how it all works. They're all looking at it in one sense deeply, but in another sense superficially. And they don't see how will can have a role. But when you come to the quantum perspective, then you do have this quantum field of potentialities. They're all potential. Whatever happens, the whole world is, from the Gaudiya point of view, the whole world of matter is more mind-like than it is physical-like. It's more a realm of potentialities that could happen. And then they take appearances like trees. I'm looking out my window, and fences and buildings and mountains and so forth. These are all ideas, really. As I said, stones don't think, they are thoughts. Right? So, whoa, that's pretty interesting. The point being that there's in the quantum field of potentialities, the jiva's will can be expressed in a potentiality that will become real. That's why if you enter, well, that's a kind of a fancy way, modern way of speaking about meditation, entering the quantum field, and seeing your will and the role it plays in causing things to happen. Ultimately, the liberated jiva is called satya sankalpa, one of its qualities. Whatever it wills happens. Of course, whatever it wills is only for the pleasure of Krishna, and so there you're in the Lila, and it's all happening. But the role of the will is significant, and for the sadhaka, another way to think about it is we need mercy and we need effort. So the effort is our will, our effort to embrace the grace that we've got and change our lot for the better. That's the exercise of our will. We need to strengthen that. Now, if you can meditate, that's another. Learn to meditate. That's another thing. Right? Then you can see. You can. One of the mystical, probably the most common siddhi, if you will, or a semblance of a city is when one starts to see things are happening because they're supposed to happen. The synchronicity of things. Paramatma. Oh, I was thinking this, and there I went there, and that happened over here. And this starts to become your life, like that's all very magical and so forth. So, in that instance, then the will is less suppressed, much less suppressed by material nature. It's coming out. So those are some thoughts as we conclude today's discussion. You had another question too, or comment? Or is that, yeah, okay, well.
Oh, yeah, no, that helped. But yeah, I guess because I wasn't really quite sure where my question was leading, but it's like how to align our will with Krishna's will, but then also still have a will of our own. Where is it separate? Is that like separated? There's no separation there.
Well, let me take, for example, all the every cowherd boy loves Krishna, is completely surrendered to him, but each one is different, right? They have their own will. Some like bananas, some like grapefruits, some like mangoes, some like watermelons, right? And when they like watermelon, they taste it. Krishna's tasting it through the tongue of the cowherd boy, which is a form that's an expansion of Krishna's own form, which is your form. So the particulars of each gopa and gopi are there. They have their own desires. They're all part of rasa. So there's a more basic sense. Nimitras matra sabhisachin, it says in the Gita. Arjuna is praying to become a nimitta, an instrument. This is the more basic sense. Let me become an instrument of Krishna, right? Whatever he wants. And then if you become acquainted with what he wants and you become more qualified, you see what he really likes in the Braj Lila, and some aspect of that attracts us naturally. And so you want to become like that. And then the details of that are going to come out of your own Atma. So you're going to have your own will, and it's going to be non-different from Krishna's will, but it'll be different from the will of another gopi. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Nice to speak with you all. I hope to be with you next week. Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bol.
Hari Bol. Thank you very much. Mark Betten has a couple questions, but let's leave that for next week. Mark, if you come next Sunday, we'll ask your questions. And I had a couple other smaller announcements. One is, of course, that next Thursday, Sadhvi is going to be speaking on impediments to devotion. That's the class she's going to give. And another announcement that is quite significant, I think, is that Haripriya from Finland has written a small book, and it's based on her classes on faith on this Tattvavik series. I think it was a couple of years ago. And I think it's a great, cause for celebration when devotees start, talking about bhakti in their own terms, from their own experience, and writing about it and stuff. So I really hope you guys can check this stuff out. I'll post a link to it in the chat. Let's see here. No, I can't access it now. But no, somehow this whole thing jammed up. Hold on. Yeah. No. Anyway, the URL is thelittlefaithproject.org. And we sent out an email with the Sri Chaitanya Sangha newsletter, but if you didn't catch it, check it out, thelittlefaithproject.org. And it's 125 pages or something. So smaller book, but it's very well written and interesting stuff. Anyway, I'll see you guys next week, and stay safe. Hari Bol.